Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to Cimmerian September, an event created by, of course, Michael K. Vaughan, designed to get everybody to read Conan, to read Robert E. Howard's original Conan stories, which are collected in a couple of different readily available editions that aren't adulterated by any pastiche writers, and will give you a really good idea of what all the fuss is about. I am taking a different path for September. I am rereading. I did just the other day reread one of Robert E. Howard's Conan stories, but for the bulk of the month, I'm continuing what I started last month, which is a reread of all of Marvel Comics' Savage Sword of Conan Black and White magazine adventures, which has its ups and downs. Definitely has its ups and downs. I am right now in the very later thickets of Savage Sword of Conan. So what are we at here? Yeah, in the issues that are past issue 200. When the readership had dropped off, I had dropped off. I wasn't reading these things. So a lot of this is brand new to me. But it's underscoring a problem that the writer, which was almost always Roy Thomas, had to face when it came to Conan. He had to come out with many, many, many Conan adventures. And how do you do that? How do you do that over and over again, right? How many monsters can this guy kill? How many wenches can he save? How many wizards can he behead? Before it starts to get a little repetitive. Well, I mean, you're writing 2 Conan stories every month, and one of them for Savage Sword is fairly long. What are you doing for this month? Is it going to be a giant animal? A giant version of some smaller animal? Is it going to be a prehistoric animal? Is it going to be a monster? A wizard of some kind? Warring bands of warriors? That sort of thing. There are only so many things that you can do, and it starts to show. And it really shows in these later issues. Not only because by this point a lot of the good artists have gone, but also because by this point there's not... And Roy Thomas is an incredibly inventive writer, but there's not a lot that even he can do. It leads you to a few temptations. One of those temptations is multi-part stories, which these later issues of Savage Sword of Conan all have them. Multiple multi-part stories. So you've got half of one story in one issue. It's to be continued in the next issue, to be continued after that. There's a long plot line here in these later issues that stars Conan and Red Sonja that goes on for issue after issue after issue. I think there's 5 issues total. With it only being half of any one thing you buy on the stand. And then there are other stories, and they continue as well. That's one expedient that you will certainly be tempted to use. And another one, especially when it comes to Robert E. Howard, is time travel. You will be really tempted to time travel Conan. For a whole bunch of different reasons. But mainly because all of Robert E. Howard's other great characters are set in different time periods. Conan can't ever meet them in the normal course of events. The character that Roy Thomas plucked from the bare outlines of a Robert E. Howard creation and made his own, Red Sonja, the she-devil with a sword, she lives at the same time as Conan. Conan can meet her. But none of the others live at the same time as Conan. In fact, 2 of them, 2 of Howard's most popular creations, other than Conan, are thousands of years apart from him, one in one direction and one in the other. One is thousands of years in the past, and one is thousands of years in the future. In the thousands of years in the past, you have King Kull of Atlantis. Fans really wanted these 2 to meet. Very much so. Robert E. Howard wanted them to meet. And then thousands of years in the future, you have Solomon Kane. Robert E. Howard's Puritan hero. Puritan adventurer. And naturally, Roy Thomas wants Conan to be able to meet Solomon Kane. And in the issues that we're talking about today, it's 2 issues because it's a broken up story, so you need to look at both of them to get the whole heart of it, just like with the daughter of Raktavashi. In Conan number 219, Conan meets Solomon Kane. This is written by Roy Thomas with artwork by Colin McNeil that didn't appeal to me at first. Then I started to like it. I'm actually kind of fond of Colin McNeil's artwork now and kind of wonder what else he's done. It starts off very evocatively. See, you notice all of that indistinct blurring and cross-hatching. This is a sense of what Colin McNeil will do if you let him do it, and unfortunately Roy Thomas does. But it starts off with Conan the Barbarian being chased by warriors. They have spears and arrows, so he has to run from them. But it also starts off with Solomon Kane riding through the woods of Devon and being pursued by dark figures. Just 3 of them. And Solomon Kane, this is an older Solomon Kane. Notice this is black and white, but he has gray hair, not black hair. He has a head of silver hair. And he says three's no throng when it comes to highwaymen. So he's pretty sure that he can handle these beings, but they aren't human. He quickly learns they aren't human, and they can easily beat him. Same thing with Conan, only with Conan I have more issues. He is chased onto a rock bridge by these spear throwers, and at one point, see, this is the stuff you have to do if you're Roy Thomas and you're writing Conan over and over again. You have to keep him bodily intact, so he has to be superhuman. We saw that scene yesterday where he falls 20 feet onto his shoulder on stone. Unless you are a superhuman being, that is going to break your shoulder. And if your shoulder was broken in the Hyborian age, you'd never use that arm again and might die. Same thing here. Conan is holding on to the stone ledge when the warrior that's chasing him smashes a sword down on his fingers and does not sever them. That should cut Conan's fingers right off. Conan's fingers aren't supernatural. His fingers aren't tough. Nobody's fingers are tough. Believe you me. One of the first things that torturers learn is that nobody's fingers are tough. That should just sever his fingers, and it doesn't. Instead, the blade stops at his finger bones, I guess, that are made of adamantium. But it does cause Conan to fall. And when all of these preliminaries are over with, our heroes find themselves confronting each other. There's that bottom panel there. He calls Solomon Kane an old man right away because he sees gray hair and has no idea. We get a great McNeil pinup there of Conan identifying himself. They can understand each other, but each one assumes that the other has been summoned by the demons that brought them here. And so they fight, very briefly. This is a Marvel comic, after all. The heroes have to fight before they make peace. They clash swords, and Solomon Kane says, "What? I met you sword against sword, but your sheer strength hurled me back. Am I to perish at last at the hands of a devil carved of bronze?" And then he says, "No, by the eternal, 'tis the Lord's work I do, shielding the world from the spawn of Satan. And he will sustain me, though all the hordes of hell shall rise up in my path." Which is one of many points in this issue where I wanted to say to Solomon Kane, "You're a heretic. You're going to hell." So it doesn't matter how often you pray to the blessed one above if you're still a heretic. But if he's a heretic, then what is Conan after all? They don't even recognize the gods that they're calling on. But eventually they realize that they should team up. And so they do. They can understand each other, although they don't understand each other's references at all. Conan has never heard of England, and Solomon Kane has never heard of the kingdom of Cush, except in the Bible. He has no idea. They don't know their local references, but they realize that they are inside a giant skull. Look at this panel. That's terrific. That's about when I started to warm up to Colin McNeil. They realize that they are on an altar in the eyes of a giant skull. It was a pretty neat place for our heroes to appear. Then we get the rest of this issue, and there's a Conan story, I think from his youth, that's not particularly good. And then we have to get to the next issue to get the continuation. And we have, once again, another Colin McNeil cover. There is Conan and Solomon Kane. Barely make it out here. A little bit of a dark resolution. But our heroes, look at that. That is awesome. As an opening page, that is awesome. Our heroes spring into the fray because they've got an evil wizard to kill. And Conan, when the spears start to fly in their direction, he just leaps to the floor and starts hacking away. Solomon Kane is older, and we're told, Roy Thomas tells us that he has to climb his way down. And Conan is scornful. He says to Conan, "I am here," and Conan says, "Did I call you?" But he says, "Still, you don't fight badly for an old man." And they go through a large rigmarole of learning about this wizard, learning about his plot to restore the wizardly caste of Atlantis. It connects Conan's ancient Atlantean ancestors with Conan today, in a very timid way. And it also connects very timidly to Solomon Kane, who at this point in his career was carrying a voodoo wizard staff that had magic imbued in it. So there are magical MacGuffins shot throughout here, one of which is a medallion that the sorcerer wears. That is going to be the key to a lot in this storyline. The sorcerer is brought low by treachery. There's a lot of treachery in this story. And those hooded riders reappear. And Solomon Kane warns Conan, says, "Beware, barbarian, those hellspawn are not human." Conan says, "I suspect I've fought 10 demons for every one of yours, and whatever's solid enough to wear cloak and hat, my steel can cut." But he can't. They're freezing cold. But Solomon Kane, fortunately, has the medallion that he tosses to Conan. And that allows Conan to affect these beings. But there's still a large crowd of temple guards that want these two dead. Solomon Kane notices a way that he can even the odds. It's a great little moment here. He notices that his pistol is still around. It's still right there. Conan has no idea what that is. Solomon Kane mentions that these people from Lost Atlantis would not even recognize what a pistol was. They wouldn't know how valuable it was. And Conan says, "What in Ishtar's name is a pistol?" And Solomon Kane says, "You would not understand. Call it an arrowhead powered by a thunderbolt." And Colin McNeil splits the panel into 3. That is very well done. That's a good artistic decision. I really like this guy's work on the panel. But Conan notices that although it works incredibly well, Solomon Kane tells him it needs time to reload, which makes it less effective to Conan's mind than bow and arrow. And he decides they need to charge at the enemy. And we get another pinup page, and it's terrific. Look at that. That is just awesome. This is not a case of Rob Liefeld, who doesn't know human anatomy. Look at how tiny Conan's foot is. Look at how tiny his little hand is there holding the medallion. This is not a case of that, because we've seen in these issues that this guy does know how to draw. Instead, this is stylistic and really good. It might owe something to Liefeld. Who knows? I don't know anything about this artist, but it feels much more controlled. It feels real. That's just a terrific panel of our two heroes charging forward. A very interesting decision on Roy Thomas's part to give us an older Solomon Kane, instead of having them meet Solomon Kane in the prime of his health. But they dispose of the amulet, and that wraps up the mystery, and all that's left is for them to part as friends, which they do even though they're fading. See, the hands are fading in their handshake. Conan says, or rather, well, it's Conan who says it, "By my faith, our hands pass through each other." But I think that dialogue was meant for Solomon Kane, because Conan says throughout this issue, this whole adventure, that Cimmerians don't have much use for Crom, their god. That's why Conan says, that's why I curse by the names of all the gods that I've encountered in my travels, figuring if one of them is real and is more helpful than Crom, they might be flattered and do something for me. Conan says, "And soon the ages will gape between us again like a chasm beyond crossing." And Solomon Kane says, "Except by friendship, man." And Conan says, "Aye, except by friendship." And then they fade away. So they have met and they have understood each other, and we get, profiles of them. Another mention is made at the out here to Solomon Kane not being at his prime, and mentioning that they are 12,000 years apart. And Conan, we're told, as if felled by some irresistible spark stretching across the millennia, Conan almost smiles. And that's the end of an inevitable adventure. It was inevitable that Conan and Solomon Kane were going to team up. And it really brought to my mind all the problems that I have with Solomon Kane as a character. I've mentioned many times before, even just on Savage Sword of September, that the Dude Bros love Solomon Kane. They absolutely love him. But I've never quite understood why. He's just a historical fiction character, and I mean just very pointedly, because he is set in history. Conan is not. Solomon Kane is set in history. He's involved directly with historical characters. He's involved directly in historical events. He's a Puritan, for instance. And I think that makes him a lot less universal. He's not in the age of fantasy anymore, even though Robert E. Howard does a really good job in his various adventures. of working in the supernatural. Even so, it feels much more of a reach. I mean, I've read the Solomon Kane stories, and I've read a lot of the adaptations of them, but, I mean, he knew Francis Drake and sailed with Francis Drake until he and Francis Drake had a falling out. So the more you know about Francis Drake, the more real Solomon Kane feels in all the wrong ways. The more human, the more life-sized he feels in all the wrong ways. I mean, I knew Francis Drake. Martin Frobisher and I circumnavigated his pole a number of different occasions at the court before he went on his merry way. It takes the bloom off the rose when you're reading a character like that who, when you're reading a Conan adventure or a Cull adventure and they do something amazing or something amazing happens to them, you can take a step back and say, oh, wow. When that happens to someone like Solomon Kane, who's firmly ensconced in the real world, you're thinking, oh, no, there are 8 different reasons why that would never happen. Or, oh, no, the only reason you would even think that is true or that would make a good plot twist is because you don't actually know the history that you're writing about, etc., etc. Solomon Kane, in other words, invites peat entry. And that would certainly line up. That would do a lot to explain a lot of his biggest fans that I've met over the years. I'm just saying. This adventure did a lot more to make me a fan of Colin McNeil's artwork than it did to make me a fan of Solomon Kane. I did find it interesting that Roy Thomas said, this is his MacGuffin. He can do anything he wants with it. He could have picked Solomon Kane from anywhere in his adventures. I think he picked this particular Solomon Kane at this particular point in his life because he knows the adventures of Solomon Kane really well. You can work out a timeline for those adventures. And I think he needed a Solomon Kane who was older, who was more familiar with magic, who was in England at the time, which Solomon Kane was always drawn back to England, but he wasn't usually there. And also, crucially, that wizard staff that he needs to have, or at least have knowledge of. So you need an older and wiser Solomon Kane for this story. I think it was canny on Roy Thomas's part to realize that. But so that's it for me. I think that I've had enough of the above 200s Savage Sword of Conan for now. There's still plenty of time left in Cimmerian September. So I think I will go to much earlier issues. Even though I know them better, I'll go to much earlier issues and see what I make of them for the next installment. So I'll wrap this up for now, and I'll try that next time. I will see you then. Thank you, BookTube.